If you're a One Piece fan, you've probably wondered about a few things like how big is the world or how long does it take to travel. So I've gone through all the pre-time skip chapters to answer these questions and more. We'll be starting our journey at Reverse Mountain, the beginning of the Grand Line going through all of Paradise. We'll cover about half the distance it takes to circumvent the world, so we'd be able to roughly find out the circumference of the planet if we can get a decent picture of how long it takes to travel. But we have a few things to go over to get a sense of how it is to travel the Grand Line. First, you have to pick one of presumably 7 islands as your first destination, which decides your future going forward. To do this, you have to have a log pose, which is the most important component to traveling here, and is also the deciding factor for how long it takes to travel, because every island in the Grand Line takes a different amount of time to set the log pose's next destination. It could take a few hours, days, or even years for the log pose to set. If you don't have a log pose, we've seen in the story people being able to find an island based on the weather, because every island has a different climate, and it causes the seas of the Grand Line to have extreme weather conditions seen most clearly at the start, where all the starting islands are in close proximity, causing hellish conditions for travel. But with this information, when the seas get calmer and the weather condition becomes more stable, you're able to know an island is close. We've seen the Straw Hats do this multiple times throughout the story. So with all this said, we found the 2 most important factors of traveling in One Piece, that being the log pose and the weather. With the basic set, we can start traveling. The first destination the Straw Hats chose to go to is Cactus Island. With the help of the log pose crocus provided to the Straw Hats, they leave Reverse Mountain in the middle of the day and arrive at Whiskey Peak around sunset, so it only took them a couple of hours at most. While you might be thinking this could easily just be another day in the future, right before they arrive on the island, Zoro wakes up from the nap he took in Reverse Mountain and sees Vivi on the ship for the first time. So it couldn't have been more than a day since they left Reverse Mountain. With this, we have the travel time up to a few hours. For simplicity's sake, let's just say it took about 6 hours. The log pose, on the other hand, took from sunset to morning for it to set to the next island, so the time for the log pose is up to about 12 hours. For the next island, we have Little Garden, which again only takes a couple of hours to get to, with the Straw Hats leaving Whiskey Peak at sunrise and them arriving in Little Garden in the middle of the day. 2 points of information to suggest this is the same day as the dialogue of Sanji and Usopp, and the fact that the crew, especially Nami, have the same clothes on. But what makes this island really treacherous is the amount of time needed for the log pose to set, which is a full year, so the total time went up by a year with just this island alone. But luckily the Straw Hats got their hands on an eternal pose, so they could leave the island. With Nami getting sick, they had to find a doctor quick, and with Vivi saying it would take at least another week to get to Alabasta, the crew had to find an island without the help of a log pose for the first time, and like I said earlier in the video, they did this with the help of the weather. But how long did it take to find Drum Island? Well, for the first time in the video, we finally get in story dates. First is the narrator saying the next day when they meet Wapol for the first time, plus 1 night passing, and Usopp before landing on Drum saying they meet Wapol and them yesterday. With this, we can see that it took them about 2 days to get to Drum Island from Little Garden, and since we still have the eternal pose for Alabasta, the time it takes for a log pose to set in Drum Island is unknown. Figuring out the time it takes to travel to Alabasta gets a little contentious with these points of information. Number 1. In Chapter 130, Vivi, after leaving Little Garden, says it would take at least another week to get to Alabasta. Number 2. In Chapter 154, when leaving Drum Island, the Straw Hats have a big party celebrating Chopper joining the crew. Number 3. In the very next chapter, Sanji gets really mad because all the food on the ship disappeared in 1 night, and with them having a big party that makes sense. Number 4. In the next chapter, we get a narrator box stating it's the 5th day since leaving Drum Island. Number 5. In the next chapter, Zoro says it's been 4 days since he last ate right before landing on Alabasta. If we consider this as the 5th day out at sea, 4 days ago would be the party where Luffy ate all the food on the ship. So with these 5 points, we can get a pretty convincing timeline that it took about 1 week to get from Little Garden to Alabasta. Just like Vivi said, 2 days to get to Drum and 5 days to get to Alabasta, so 7 days in total. But this is just one way to look at it. The problem with this timeline is in point number 3. With the official translation having Sanji say 1 night, the timeline of 5 days makes sense, but the official translation has numerous translation errors, especially early on, so fan translations are usually more correct. And with them saying every night instead of 1 night, this puts Luffy eating all the food on the ship a couple days after leaving Drum Island. The maximum you could get it is saying they ran out of food 5 days after leaving, and with Zoro saying it's been 4 days since he last ate, you could say it took them 9 days to get to Alabasta, making the total time 11 days instead of the week Vivi said. But this also makes sense considering 1 week was them going straight ahead without any detours, but we know they went to Drum, so the extra time makes a lot of sense. And looking at what Japanese-speaking One Piece fans have to say about this, the 9 days seems more accurate, but to me, both are acceptable. So I'll just say the total travel time now is between 7.5 and 11.5 days. As for the log pose, the time it took for it to set in Alabasta is once again unknown, but they stayed there for about 1 week, so it couldn't have been more than that. After escaping the Marines, the Straw Hats head to their next destination. But after a ship falls from the sky, the log pose started pointing up, and Robin says it's been captured by a sky island. I don't know if you would call it lucky or unlucky, but it seems like it's possible for the log pose to change even after locking onto an island if the magnetic force of another island is strong enough. So it seems not everyone traveling this path would get stuck with a log pose pointing to the sky, but after meeting a scuba diving monkey, Robin stole his eternal pose so the straw hats weren't stuck in the middle of the ocean, and with it we're able to get to Jaya. So right after joining the crew, she's already saving all of them, a true goat indeed. But let's get into how long it took to get from Alabasta to Jaya. For this, we have to look through chapters 217 to 222, with chapter 217 being the day the crew leave Alabasta, and Robin asks to join the crew. We actually get a time reference for this because they were supposed to leave Alabasta at noon. With this, we can see it only took a few hours to get to Jaya. I'd say a maximum of 6 hours traveling, because when we arrive at Jaya, it's still daytime, and the night doesn't start till chapter 229. But you could definitely say the travel time was shorter to give more room for the events of Jaya, though. But we finally get another time for the log pose to set, that being 2 days. We haven't gotten a time since Little Garden, so it's nice to see. With the crew heading to the sky, we don't really have travel time to add this arc, but we do get a time for the log pose to set once again, with it being set at the end of the arc in chapter 302. And with the arc lasting at least 2 days, we can add another 2 to 6 days to the log pose total. With them finally coming back to the Blue Sea, it only took them a few hours to find Long Ring Long Land based on the clothes they were wearing, especially Nami and Robin, since they tend to change their clothing, but even Sanji looks the same and didn't put on his suit. It might have taken longer, but I personally think it only took a few hours. But since they got here from the sky, it might have taken longer if the crew went directly from Jaya to Long Ring Long Land. But I'll just add 6 hours to the total, making it 8 to 12 days so far. Once again, we don't know how long it took for the log pose to set, but they stayed at the island for about 5 days. With the narrator box in chapter 322 saying that it was the morning of the 3rd day at sea since leaving Long Ring Long Land right before landing at Water 7, we can say it took about 2 to 3 days between the islands, putting the total time traveling at 10 to 15 days. And in chapter 323, Granny Kokoro says it takes about 1 week for the log to set to the next island, so we can add another 7 days to the total. And in chapter 435, the log pose sets to its next destination, that being Fishman Island. Oh! Isn't that in like 200 chapters? Well, there are 2 reasons why the log pose skips straight to Fishman Island. One, Thriller Bark is from the West Blue, so it doesn't have a strong magnetic force like an island from the Grand Line does. 2, Saba Odi is just a collection of trees, so they don't have a magnetic force either. The time it takes to get to Thriller Bark is slightly unclear, but with chapter 442 being the first time Nami uses the bath on the Sunny, and the day the crew land on the island, the maximum time it could have taken is 1 day since Nami showers daily. While it could have just taken a few hours, I'll just add 1 day to the total, putting it at 11 to 16 days. After leaving Thriller Bark in chapter 490, we're greeted with another narrator box saying it's been several days, so between 3 to 6 days, making the total 14 to 22 days of traveling before making it to the Red Line once again. With this, we've come to the end of our journey. With the best of ships and the best navigator on the planet, the crew spent up to 22 days on the seas of paradise. So with all that out of the way, with the results gained through this video, it seems like half the islands of paradise only take a couple of hours to travel between. That's really surprising. I didn't expect that coming into this video. And if it takes more than a day to travel between the islands, Oda usually gives a narrator box or a character says how long it's been. We can also get some juicy info about the world of One Piece, namely its size, because distance is just calculated by speed and time, and we already have the time we're going to be using, which is 22 days. Now all we have to do is get the speed. The crew were traveling with the Mary for about 15 days, and with the Sunny for 7 days at max. So with the Mary being a caravel ship with speeds ranging from 7 to 15 kilometers an hour, the distance it would cover would be between 2,700 to 5,400 kilometers. Since it's the Mary, I'll be giving it the top speed, so she traveled about 5,500 kilometers. For the Sunny, I'll be basing its speed off of one of the fastest pre-modern ships, that being the Cuddy Shark, and since Frankie's real name Cuddy Flam might be based off the ship, I think it's fitting. With speeds reaching 33.4 kilometers an hour, the distance it would cover would be about 5,600 kilometers, making the total distance about 11,000 kilometers. With the calculations done, so far the size of the One Piece planet would be about half the size of our Earth, but if that was true, Alabasta alone would at least take up a third of Paradise, so I guess using a real-life basis for the speed just didn't work. But we do have one example where a explicit speed for travel was stated, which was when they crossed the Sandora River. With a width of 50 kilometers, they crossed it in 1 hour. So if we give the speed of travel in One Piece a base of 50 kilometers an hour, that raises the distance from 10,000 to 26,000 kilometers, which is much more palatable. But to change the size of the One Piece planet drastically, one has to change the speed of travel. If you want to say their planet is 10x the size of ours, then the Mary would have to consistently travel faster than a supercar, which would be insane. But it's safe to assume its size is about 1.5 to 2 times the size of Earth. But considering we have islands about the size of Australia just lying around, that might just be a bit shaky too. I'm broke. Currently down 230 bucks running this channel. I don't know if anyone will watch this video, or any video I put out for that matter, but I'll try my best to get a video out every week for as long as I can, and if anyone out there wants to come aboard on this journey and bring along all their hopes and dreams, I just launched a Patreon where you can get access to all the behind the scenes I can offer. If you've ever wondered what it takes to start, run, and maintain a channel, or how it's like getting 40 million views on TikTok, the history of Prometheus X and the future of it as well, you can join the crew and help me get to minimum wage. But if you want to donate just to see this number change, you can do that too.